Hi everyone, I want to try to do a part 2 to my iPet goat analysis, and there's something interesting that I noticed that actually ties into what I presented in part 1, although I didn't know it at the time. I realized it a little bit later, but just as a quick review of this scene over here, this is just after Eve dropped the apple when she realized the apple doesn't belong to her, and so she drops the apple and it hits against this shoe over here, which is actually, it's a shoe with a toe cap, which is actually Strong's number 2777. Okay, I'll just show you the word over here, the definition of this word. It means small head, but if you look at the extended definition, you see that it also means the toe cap of a shoe, and this is the word kephalis in the Greek, and this is the same word as Strong's number 2777. It's the word kephalis, which means little head, the capital of a column. The tips are wooden knobs of the wooden rod around which parchments were rolled, or the roll of a book. So it's the same thing that is talked about in Ezekiel 2:8 and 2:9, where it says, "But thou, son of man, hear what I say unto thee, be not thou rebellious like that rebellious house, open thy mouth and eat what I give thee. And when I looked, behold, a hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein." And if you look at the word roll of a book, it's the same word as kephalis. And so I'll just show it to you again. You can see it's Strong's number 2777. It means little head, capital of a column, the tips or wooden rod around which parchments were rolled, or the roll of a book. And it also means the toe cap of a shoe. You see, that's the same word, kephalis, that also means the toe cap of a shoe. So basically you have the same thing being represented here in this part of the movie as you do here in this part of the movie. Okay, and it's the same thing that's represented in Revelation 10:8, which I'll get to, but just before that is where it says, "But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets." And so that's one of the reasons why I want to try to solve this mystery, is because it says over here in verse 7 in Revelation 10:7, which I believe represents the year 2017, that the mystery of God should be finished. And as I mentioned before, this is a parallel to Daniel 12:7, where it says, "And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swore by him that lived forever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished." So this is the beginning of the tribulation, the 3.5 years in verse 7, and the mystery should be finished, or all these things shall be finished, in verse 7. And I just want to point out, as I've mentioned before, we're actually in between the years 2017 and 2018 currently. To say that it's the year 2018 would be like saying that you're 1 year old when you're only 7 months old. So we're only 7 months into the year. It's not 2018 until the end of 2018 when you start going into 2019. Okay, so this is where we're at right now. And then in the next verse, Daniel asks, he says, "Oh my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" So he's asking what the end will be in verse 8. And then he's told by the angel, he says, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end." So the words are sealed until the time of the end. The end is mentioned in verse 8. And when you go back to Revelation 10, you see that the book is now open. So this would stand to reason that this is the time of the end. And this also matches up with the scene over here in iPet Goat, which I'll get to. but it's over here where John is told to take the little book, which is now open in the hand of the angel, which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And when I went unto the angel and said unto him, Give me the little book, he said unto me, Take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but in thy mouth it shall be sweet as honey. So this is a parallel to Ezekiel 2:9. So again, you have the number 9 here when he is told to eat the little book, the roll of a book, which is the word Kephalis. You can see that right there. Okay, and that's Strong's number 2777, which would seem to match up with the Hebrew year 5777, which we're still currently in until the end of 5778. And then you see over here the next Strong's number is 2778, which is the word census, but in all of these instances it refers to the coin with which tax is paid, or tribute money. And so you see that referring to the coin that was tribute money that was given to Caesar in all of these instances. And then when you get back to the movie, you see that the shoe is stepping on the coin. And as I've mentioned before, there's always a true and a false. So there's two ways to interpret this. This can be primarily interpreted as Jesus stepping on the one world currency, putting a halt to it, or at least for the bride. You see the apple splitting in two, which is the DNA splitting and cleaving together with Christ, which is the same thing that happens with the Mount of Olives in Zechariah 14. Okay, and I'll just go over that real quick. In Zechariah 14:4, it says, And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it to the south. And so when you look at the word feet in the Strong's in Zechariah 1:44, you see that it's the word regal, which is Strong's number 7272, which adds up to 144, and it means foot, leg, of God, of seraphim, feet. And then over here it says euphemistically the pudenda. And I had noticed this some time ago, around the time of the Shiloh prophecy. Okay, so I've gone back exactly 2 years from now, back to 2016, and this was a time that we were looking into the Shiloh prophecy and the fact that Jupiter was at the feet of Leo. He started out around the area of Regulus, I believe, and it went towards the back feet, eventually went into the womb of Virgo. Okay, and it was sometime after that that this comet was discovered. That's C 2017 E1 Borisov. That was referred to as the Conception Comet. It appeared just around that time. This was on August 27th when there was a conjunction between Jupiter and Venus, which was considered to be the Bethlehem star, one of the closest conjunctions that was referred to as the Bethlehem star. So this was like one of the most important ones. And then the comet went along with Jupiter into the womb of Virgo, and then it disappeared shortly after that. It was only visible for a short time on Stellarium or Sky Live. Okay, so it was at that time that I realized the significance of the word regal and what it means. And as you can see here, it's Strong's number 7272, which adds up to 144. and it comes from another word which also means regal, which is 70. And as I've mentioned before, the numbers 72 and 70 seem to be synonymous, because if you go to Luke 10:17, which again looks like the year 2017, this is when the 70 returned, again with joy, saying, Lord, even the devils are subject unto us by thy name. And if you look at the word 70 in the Greek, you see that Strong's number 144. And that's the number 70. And as I've mentioned before, some of the translations, such as the NIV, have 72. So 70 and 72 seem to be synonymous. 70 is just a round number, but they both seem to represent the 144,000. Okay, so getting back to Zechariah 14, when his feet stand on the Mount of Olives, that's when the Mount of Olives cleaves to the north and to the south. And so this is also a parallel to Revelation 10:8, because as I've mentioned before, what I had noticed some time ago when I looked at this in the Greek is that the mountain cleaves to the east and to the sea. Instead of saying the east and the west, it says the east and the sea. And so if you look at a map of Israel, you see that the land would be to the east and the sea would be to the west. And so that's when I realized that the west is synonymous with the sea, and that this was a parallel to Revelation 10, because in Revelation 10, the mighty angel comes down from heaven and he puts one foot on the sea and one foot on the earth. And so I realized this was the same imagery, because the very next chapter, which is Revelation 11, is where it talks about the two witnesses, or the two olive trees and the two candlesticks. And so you have the same imagery in Zechariah 14, because the word olives, as I've mentioned before, can refer to olives or olive trees. So this is a parallel to Zechariah 4, when the plummet is placed on the temple, on the 7 candlesticks, and then it talks about the 2 olive trees and 2 candlesticks after that. So it's a representation of the 2 olive trees, or the 2 witnesses that come out of the mountain, just as Natan saw in his vision, just after Jesus sets foot on the Mount of Olives, which is a parallel to Zechariah 4, when the plummet is placed on the temple, and then it talks about the 2 olive trees. So I realized that the word olive in both the Greek and the Hebrew is synonymous with olive trees. So this represents the 2 witnesses, and it also represents the bride. Okay, so all those scriptures parallel with each other, and they're all pointing to this time frame. They're all representing the same thing. The apple splitting is a representation of the DNA splitting, just as you have with the Mount of Olives. The 2 olive trees represent DNA. And just as you have with the Red Sea represents DNA, and Mount Sinai, which is where the Sinai Peninsula, which is where Mount Sinai is located, is a representation of the same thing as well. This is what splits the DNA. Okay, and so I've talked about peninsulas before and what's being represented in this imagery, so I'm not going to go over that again. I'll put the links to those videos in the description box. But there's something else that ties into this as well, and it has to do with lily, because what I noticed recently is that Strong's number 77 in the Hebrew means to make white. And so this goes back to the table that I did on the fuller's field, which talked about the tree that was felled in Isaiah 6:13 going to Isaiah 6:7, and I had talked about how the fuller's field means to make white. So again, This ties into the imagery that's being represented over here. As you can see, lilies wearing white, but I'll have to continue with more in the next video.